Now listen to these words of Swamiji on peace of mind. Peace of mind is the result not of money in the bank, but of prayer and meditation. The more one contacts God in meditation, the more he feels descending upon him a blanket, as it were, of inner peace, cooling his body, calming his restless impulses, and thrilling his nerves with ever new delight. Peace is like a weightless waterfall, washing away all worries and bestowing a new glad sense of confidence. Peace of mind is his who knows that God is his only treasury. And please affirm with me, from pools of inner silence,
From pools of inner silence,
I sip the sparkling waters of thy peace.
I sip the sparkling waters of thy peace.
From pools of inner silence,
From pools of inner silence,
I sip the sparkling waters of thy peace.
I sip the sparkling waters of thy peace.
From pools of inner silence,
From pools of inner silence,
I sip the sparkling waters of thy peace.
I sip the sparkling waters of thy
A
peace.
little more quietly. From pools of inner silence,
From pools of inner silence,
I sip the sparkling waters of thy peace.
I sip the sparkling waters of thy peace.
Now in a whisper, from pools of inner silence,
Of inner silence,
I sip the sparkling waters of thy peace.
sip the
Now with the spiritual eye with deep concentration, from pools of inner silence, I sip the sparkling waters of thy peace. From pools of inner silence, I sip the sparkling waters of thy peace. And please pray silently with me. All that I own is thine, Lord. Help me to know thee as the river of peace, running silently beneath the sands of my life's experiences. Om Shanti Shanti.
Well, good morning to everyone and to all those that are tuning in online. This first reading is from Whispers from Eternity by Paramahansa Ananda, entitled, I want to hear thy song in the silence of my soul. The gentle voice saying, come home, I often heard. But through many lives it was drowned in the tumult of my wild cravings. I have forsaken the jostling crowds of desire. In the solitude of my mind, my devotion bursts to hear thy voice. Take away every dream memory of earthly sounds that yet lurks in my mind. I want to hear thy still voice, ever singing in the silence of my soul. And this reading is from The Path by Swami Kriyananda. And this is drawn from the title, Joy is Inside. Just before Paramahansa Yogananda, or I should say Swami Kriyananda, found Paramahansa Yogananda through his book, The Autobiography of a Yogi in New York. He had had a very rough time, and it lasted a good while. And it was through college, and it was through many, many different experiments that he was making to see if perhaps science would work, art would work, literature would work. He couldn't find anything. And what made it even more challenging is he had no support. This was, again, the late 40s, where yoga, guru, chakras, there was no way that this was as widespread as it is today. And so he would go to the churches and so forth and ask them, in the Bible I read, be ye therefore perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. Could you help me with that? Be nice, I guess, perhaps would be the answer. Perfection. That's the state of the soul. That's our state as we awaken to it. And so at one point, after he had done so many things, he thought, you know something, I'm not getting any support. I think I'm going to become a hermit, and I'll go down into the Brazilian jungles and meditate and hope for peace of mind. And yet he was very, very concerned because he didn't know what he was getting himself into. And so that gives you a little idea as we begin this chapter. And again, it's a happy ending because very, very soon after this last adventure into the country, where he found nothing but closed doors, going to work on farms and in plants where they were making, chemicals, anything he could find to make some money, because he wanted to get on a ship, become a merchant marine, and head off to Brazil to become a hermit. So now he's just come back to New York. That summer had proved so far a mixed bag, uplifting in the truths I'd learned, but materially speaking, a fiasco. More and more, I was beginning to wonder if I hadn't somehow landed on the wrong planet. None of my experiences over these past months had helped me to feel that this world was my home. Yet my desire to drop out seemed, from every practical standpoint, wildly unrealistic. I could not but admit to myself that my plans for becoming a hermit rested on the shakiest possible ground. I knew nothing of the practical skills I'd need to live alone in the wilderness. I had no idea how much money I'd actually need to remain a long time in South America. Worst of all, I knew so little of the spiritual path that I had no idea how to walk it alone. I didn't know how to meditate. I didn't know how to pray. I didn't know what to think about when I wasn't meditating or praying. It was becoming clear to me that without proper guidance, I was as good as lost. Yet I knew of no one to whom I could go for guidance out of the swamp of institutional religion into the clean air of universal truths. The path I was contemplating seemed, from every practical viewpoint, utter folly. I was contemplating it, however, because I had ruled out every conceivable alternative. The thought of living a so-called normal worldly life filled me with dread, the more so because I was so alone in my rejection of it. Most of my friends were getting married and settling down to good jobs. The pressure on me from all sides to do likewise was in a sense unceasing. To my mind, however, even a lifetime of starvation and suffering would be worth it if only by so living I could find God. And what should I know to gain from finding him? There my notions remained vague, though certainly I would have considered even peace of mind an incomparable blessing. What mattered to me most, however, was that to know him would be to know truth, and that not to know him would mean wallowing in falsehood and delusion. Wherever my path would lead, I knew that I had only one valid choice: to offer my life to him. It would be up to him thereafter to lead me where he willed. Just recently, I was watching a video. We love sports. And this was a golfer back in the 30s. And he was a phenomenon, Bobby Jones. And he didn't have an easy time of it in the beginning. As a matter of fact, he didn't win a champion tournament for a drought of 7 years. But when finally it all came together for him, he was unbeatable. As a matter of fact, in New York, for the heroes like Charles Lindbergh, when he came back after flying over the Atlantic and so forth to France, Lindbergh had a ticker tape parade, all the confetti raining down. Well, Bobby Jones had 2 of them. That was how great he was during that particular era in the 30s. And he was asked from time to time, because he was a superstar, tell me, when you get your ball caught in a sand trap or, in the weeds somewhere, what do you do? And he said, I just play it where it lay. And incredibly, his karma at one point and I believe it cut short his golfing career. He contracted some kind of a dread disease and was confined to a wheelchair. And of course, people were just horrified by this. And yet they saw that there was this serenity, and they asked him, how are you able to cope with this? And he said, well, like in golf, I play it where it lay. This is what was given to him. Now he was in a wheelchair. This other life was over for him, but this was something that he accepted. Undoubtedly, he was a spiritual man in his own way. I don't know his background, but he was a man of tremendous strength, without a doubt. And in his later years, he was honored in so many ways. And there's one time where he was there in Ireland, where he also had become a national hero by being able to prevail on this extremely difficult course back in his playing days in the 30s. And so he was being honored. And so he, stumbled out of his chair with all of his will, holding on to the podium as he shared his thoughts. And they were so sweet, because this was not a man that held any resentment. He was content. This is what was given to him. He had had an extraordinary life, and now it was this chapter. And really, this chapter became even more extraordinary, because then he was not only a great golfer, he turned out to be a great man. And there's probably people that knew that in his heyday as a champion, because of the vibration that he had, that he emanated. But when the supreme test came, he was able to rise to the occasion. As Swami struggled with, this, as we all have, because all of us have inspiring stories where, whether it lasts days, weeks, months, or years, until finally we pierce the veil and God inside. Another one of the disciples, Peggy Dietz, who was there when we celebrated Master's 100th anniversary of his birth, 1893. And we are fortunate to have numerous direct disciples come to celebrate this there in Ananda in California. And Peggy Dietz was one of them. And she had come to Master sometime before Swami in 1948. And she had herself a very interesting story. She initially was, again, like Swami, just going at it alone. And at one point, she became desperate because, again, late 40s, she wasn't finding any support. And so she finally, talking to God, said, listen, I think I've discovered something about myself in my journey. I didn't want anyone to come between me and God. And I apologize because I was wrong. I need help. I just need help. So please forgive me. And she knew right then that this experience of desperation and so forth, but to find her way, the journey now was to truly begin. And so she went home with this growing confidence that now that she had talked with God and found that she really did need help, she didn't know where to go, but at least she knew that much. She went home and was sitting on her bed, and she saw some scraps of paper, and she grabbed one and threw it in the wastebasket, crumbled up piece of paper that was laying there on the floor. And she knew at that moment that that piece of paper that she had thrown in the wastebasket was her answer that she had been seeking. So she dove after it. She's very intuitive, very spiritual woman. And she opened it up, and it was a flyer of Paramahansa Yogananda's autobiography of a yogi. She didn't know if the author, she said, was still alive. She went the very day to get the autobiography at the bookstore and began reading it when the phone rang. And it was one of her dear friends, a very spiritual woman that had just come from New York. And she was now in La Jolla, Southern California, and was hoping that Peggy would come down. They were dear friends to visit. And Peggy said, I'll have to catch up with you. I just can't break away. I can't tell you why, She was reading the autobiography of a yogi. And she just couldn't break herself away. And her friend said, "Oh, gee, I'm so sorry because I met this man. It's a little hard to pronounce his name, something like Paramahansa Yogananda." And Peggy said, "I'll be right down." So she closed the book and she raced down a couple-hour drive. She said she got a speeding ticket along the way and met Yogananda. And she knew, because of her awareness and sensitivity, this was her answer. And so she moved into the Hermitage, as it was, Mount Washington, the international headquarters, and had this extraordinary time with Yogananda, and was so amazed that a person like this could have so many facets. He had a great sense of humor, this enormous spiritual power and expansion. He was very, very down to earth, all of the qualities, truly as a perfect human being, as a perfect child of God. And so for Peggy, as for Swami, that period of desperation, and for Bobby Jones, the golfer, and so forth, and for all of us in so many ways with our various tests and challenges, we have to keep in mind that every time we meditate, and every time we serve, and every time we have good thoughts, and all the things that we are working on, affirmation and so forth and so on, every time we do this, we inch forward. And that's very important. And we read in Master's teachings and the teachings of Swamiji, things such as, if you want to be happy, make good decisions. Good enough, easy enough. Just make good decisions. And that means a disciplined mind is a happy mind. It means keeping the heart open. It means doing all that we can to be selfless. Because as we're able to do that, we find that all we're trying to do in this life, as our vocation, speaking ideally, is to get out of the way. That's it. Couldn't be any easier than that, though it is difficult on one level. But once we form the habit, so that then spirit can flow through. And we find as we're able more and more, it's usually for most people initially a bit of a challenge, because we do have things that we would like to do, and we have habits and all of these things. But we find by trial and error that bit by bit, as Sri Yukteswar, Yogananda's guru, said, learn to behave. And what is it to behave? Simply to be good. That's all, just be good. And we wouldn't be here if we've been behaving for many incarnations. That's why we're here. And so with that, we've got this tailwind, you might say, all of these blessings, all of this good karma that is propelling us forward. And know for certain that every single time you break right, that you choose the positive over the negative, you're being propelled by the soul. But God helps those who help themselves. And so it's us cooperating. Swami used to tell the story of this man who had a garden. And a minister came by, a priest, and said, "Oh, what a lovely garden that you and God have." And so the gardener said, "Oh, yes, you may be right, but you should have seen it when God had it all by himself." It's a jungle. So we have to participate. And so it's in the beginning, there's a bit of a gear grinding going on. It's not always easy to get ourselves in sync, to get ourselves in tune. But as we keep working at it, there does come that growing thought that there is this point in time that's reserved now by God and the great ones, and where we'll be done with this experience, we'll be awake. We'll be in bliss, and it'll be forever. It won't be, as Dr. Lewis was very concerned, because he heard from Yogananda these great cycles of the day and night of Brahma, the last billions of years. So he said to Yogananda, a little shakily, he said, once I finally, and this is of course for all of us, once we finally break through and we're free, then do we have to do it again? we finished up finally in one of these cycles of Day of Brahma. And then God says, that was so much fun. Let's go on the ride again. As if we were at an amusement park or in Disneyland. And Yogananda reassured him. He said no. And I said to Swami, when I had read that particular passage, I said, Swami, I really appreciated that you put that story in because I was kind of concerned myself. Come on, why be concerned about something that is still perhaps a bit away? We don't know how far away, but one thing at a time. Yogi Berra, here's another sports. I don't know what this is with sports. Yogi Berra was a great great catcher, back more in my era, 60s and so forth, and a very funny guy. And I think he was given the name Yogi Berra for a reason, because he had a wisdom beneath his humor. And so one time he said in some advice to someone, if you come to a crossroads, take it. So that's something to kind of meditate on. If you come to a crossroads, take it. And at Ananda, it's right in tune with Swami, with what Swami has said many times, is that if we don't quite know what to do anything. That's good. Do anything. Go weed the garden, go meditate a little bit, get the energy going. Because with that, it's all magnetism. You get that energy going, and the next thing you know, magically, God helps those who help themselves, something is drawn in. Someone calls and says, hey, I know you've been looking for a job, and I think I have one for you. All these various things. Are these coincidences? No. We have put out the necessary energy. We didn't know what to do when we were faced with the crossroads, but we thought, at least move forward and stay open, stay receptive, and there will be that needed guidance. Swami Kriyananda was in Michigan back in the 90s with Nai Swami Jyotish. And we have not Ananda, but there is a center there that was started by J. Oliver Black, who was Yogananda's second most advanced disciple, very highly advanced soul. And so they were there, and we had many people from Ananda had come over the years to Song of the Morning Ranch, as it's called. And so with Swami there, naturally they wanted to know. Ananda at that point was 20 years old. Could you tell me how Ananda started? And Swami says, I really don't know. It was a very sincere answer. And we could say the same about anything, whether it's in Bangalore or Delhi, centers in South Africa and so on. I think most people would say, I really don't know. There was many things that occurred. And as Swamiji said, really, it was a series of miracles, or Ananda would have never happened. And all he did was tune into something that was near and dear to Yogananda, World Brotherhood Colonies, and he took it on. And he said he didn't have the skill. He didn't have, what he thought would be, all of the necessary things to be the leader of this community. And it was a challenge for him, to say the least. But now, as he said, now that Ananda has been formed back in 1968, it'll be much easier. It's still challenging. It'll be much easier then, because there's some traditions and some things that we've learned, no doubt, especially because we're 50 years old. But when he was asked, would he start himself a second community, he went, one was enough. One was enough. That was when he was in his 40s, and that was plenty. But as we, were there at Ananda over some time, and he was able to train us, then we have various colonies, centers, and meditation groups now around the world. And so God helps those who help themselves. We have to appreciate that, again, as Yogananda said, the moments are more important than the years. And as I was talking to a friend, throughout the day, when you find that God is there, there's just no question about it. You feel this openness of the heart, perhaps a bright thought, maybe some revelation, stop what you're doing. And remember, as we read in the Gita, when higher duty comes, lesser duty has to be put to the side, even if it's just for a few moments, because that is God knocking at the door, and there's a possibility that it could be life-changing. And for sure, it's going to be something that's going to uplift and expand your consciousness. And so after a while, we do see that meditation and seva are brother and sister. They help each other. We do our meditation, and then it spills over into our day. And we seize those moments here and there, maybe as we're getting a little bit of water to stay hydrated in the hot season and so forth. And all of a sudden, there's this presence. And we take a few moments and get ourselves recentered, get ourselves back into our heart, get our mind bright once again, and then proceed into our day. And so we begin to really make a priority, and this is what it's all about, to stay alert. That's what it's all about, just staying alert. Because otherwise, we fall asleep at the wheel, even though our eyes are open. We think, well, that was a wonderful day, but I don't quite remember what it was all about. Like my father, who got on the spiritual path in his late 40s. And it was fortunate, this was in the late 60s, and I was on the spiritual path as well. So very deep spiritual man. And so we were able, mostly vibrationally, he wasn't on this path. He was, as he said, when I asked him one time, what do you practice? Because he had this wonderful vibration. He says, I'm practicing the art of being. And I didn't ask him any further, but his face registered that it was going well. And yet, just before, just like Swami with the trial that he went through, just like Peggy Dietz and others, he had a very, very difficult time in this transition in his late 40s. I was raised in Los Angeles, in a coastal town, and he had his own business as a civil engineer, and he was in his late 40s, and that's not exactly what you do to all of a sudden announce you're retiring, which he did, because now he wanted to take a sabbatical, which ended up to be 3.5 years of diving deep into the spiritual life. Then he went back to civil engineering, not with his business and so forth, as a consultant, and continued on. Civil engineering was not the issue. The issue is it was time for him to change gears. And he would come home, he said, for a full year. His work was in Beverly Hills. Manhattan Beach was easily an hour's drive back in the 50s, 60s. And he wouldn't remember. He's a good driver, but he wouldn't remember how he got home every single night. He'd wake up pulling into the driveway there in our home. And he realized that he had been so lost in this new discovery of the inner life that he was on automatic pilot. And thank God, God was driving. You know, another testimonial that God's doing everything, because God was really needed at that point to get him home safely. And then he was able to devote time to the spiritual path. It was very inspiring for me to be with him. And at that time, and the neighbors and relatives did not know quite what was going on. We did build a house together during that time, but that wasn't what really, that was not the focus of my father. And I was very soon there at Ananda a few years later. But for us, we know, again, from the inspiration of our own lives, that these blessings come. It can come in the form of a sabbatical. It can come in a moment of time. It can come as a revelation. It can come in so many ways. But the main thing is, when opportunity comes, this opportunity is from God. This opportunity is from Guru. And it is custom for each and every one of us. So make that the priority. And by meditating regularly and serving regularly and all of that, then smriti, memory, we are continuing to remember who we are as children of God. And so when that blessing comes, we seize it, because we're not asleep at the wheel. We are recognizing that this is another something to lift our spirits, to encourage us, to give us the growing compassion that is so important on the spiritual path. And so don't take for granted the efforts that you have been making in this life and in past lives. We've been at it. We've been very tenacious. Yogananda said, I attract stubborn people. And he meant it in a positive sense. You have to be stubborn. And so now that we have the inner life, to whatever degree, this is the time to realize that this is a piece of heaven that has come down to touch us. And now all we need to do, as I like to say, because I like to keep things simple, if you want to win, show up. Show up for sadhana, show up for your seva, show up to brighten your mind, show up to reform your diet, show up to reform your exercise regime. Show up, show up, show up. What are you doing by showing up? You're there in the presence of God in all the various forms, both within and without, and thanking God, which is all important, that once again, he's knocked on our door and said, is anybody home? And we say, yes, come in. That's all that's required. As Yogananda said, how can I come in if you shut me out? He said, all I mind is your indifference, because that's the block. And the gurus are not going to impose. They wouldn't do that for a moment. They are there to help us. They're in our hearts. They're a thought away. But we have to be willing, and be willing to do anything. If you find yourself at a crossroads, take it. Keep moving forward. The sage advice of Yogi Berra. Yogi Berra. And keep in mind again that these saints, why do they come back again and again? Yogananda said he'd come back 1 trillion times. Why? Because they remember clearly what it was like when they were like us, struggling, trying to figure out, who am I? Who am I? And bit by bit, we are discovering, and certainly now, that we are children of God, we are divine, and we do have a little loose end, and the loose end is this karma. That's okay. Even good thoughts, as Yogananda said, release karma. Amazing, even good thoughts. And bit, by doing that, he said, most people's spines are spiritually paralyzed with what karma? So bit by bit, through meditation, through seva, we release this karma and become free. And then share with others in so many ways that freedom that really is all of our destiny. Okay. I think we're going to have our arati. Okay, please stand.